Hello everybody. Today I bring you a new story. What if Deku was a ghoul? I did not write this story. The writer is just low. Please support them. Please subscribe and like for more videos. Now let's dive in. Thick icy clouds cover Muzurafo like a blanket. The murky overcast cracks with streaks of lightning, jagged lines slicing through the vapor like a knife digging into soft flesh. A gray fog begins to drift overhead, the broken shape of it forming a glassy sky. It's late, not even a single car splashes through the flooded streets. Periodically, streetlights gleam overhead, shadows dark and crisp in the flickering glow. The sound of emptiness hums with the dying bulbs, only to be disrupted by a loud gregarious boom of thunder. At last, the first of many water droplets begin to descend from above. It doesn't trickle out like a shower faucet, it's more like the clouds could no longer hold the weight. The rain has become a living fabric, something one can reach their hand through. It's almost like being in a car with the window open, an outstretched arm surfing through the fast-moving air. Cold beads of water land on a girl's pale skin, running down her thin frame. She skids across the slippery path of a flooded sidewalk, her posture weakened by the weight of her soaking clothes. Arms wrapped around herself, the drenched cardigan doing a poor job of keeping her warm now that it's wet, she tries to duck under a shop's awning to get someplace drier. The fierce sound of heavy rainfall pounding on the sheet above her head is louder than the occasional boom of thunder. She shudders when a chilly breeze nearly sweeps her off of her feet. It's not an ideal place to wait the storm out, but it's the best she's got. The girl then catches sight of herself in the shop's window reflection. Messy blonde buns had become slightly frizzled and damp, a wonder how the pins held, but nonetheless disappointing to the girl. Letting out a pouty huff over her disheveled appearance, she lets herself untense a little. There's nothing better for her to occupy the time with than fixing the mess. However, there's a person watching her that isn't as concerned about the state of her hair. Slitted pupils narrow in on the damp clothing, admiring how it clings to her luxurious body. An elongated tongue runs along pointed teeth, glossing over scaly lips. Like an apex predator, the person begins to slowly creep towards her, using the dark atmosphere as a camouflage of sorts. She can't even release a startled gasp before a heavy hand is clamped down over her mouth. The person assaulting her forcefully pulls the petite girl backwards, essentially dragging her like a luggage full of dead weight. Before the girl can recuperate or struggle against the hold, the attacker pins her against the rough brick of a wall. Her head collides with the concrete, resounding with a sickening crack of her skull. Whatever concussion that may have caused makes her vision blur with occasional blotches of random color. The disoriented girl tries to wriggle free from the death grip she's in, but only makes the arrival of a headache transform into an ear-ringing migraine. Through the splotches of hazy vision, the blonde takes in the features of her assaulter. A large man with what must be a mutation quirk stands at over 8 feet tall. The scaly pattern of an alligator's hide makes up their skin, a dark shade of malachite glistening in the rain. A thick leather jacket and jeans make it hard to distinct the guy's age. He could be a biker or edgy teenager. In the face of fight or flight, the girl chooses to fight. Underneath the blonde's skirt, she keeps a knife strapped just above her thigh. Carefully unsheathing it as not to draw attention to her movements, she pretends to whimper under the alligator hybrid's strong grip. Then, she lashes out with the blade, aiming for their throat. A shard of steel clatters across the pavement. The knife had split in two. The man's alligator hide is too thick to slice into. The blonde's eyes go wide as she realizes there's nothing she can do now. Her opponent is too strong to break free from, let alone the disorientation from hitting her head is making it hard to do much of anything in defense, and she doubts her fists or nails will be enough to harm considering a knife didn't work. The alligator has a perturbed face, glancing between the broken weapon and the girl a few times. He then begins to chuckle, mostly in relief that the surprise attack didn't work. "You sure are naughty." The rank breath makes the blonde's eyes water as if it was the smell of onions. A clawed finger begins to lace itself down the cardigan on her torso, popping buttons as it runs along. "I can be naughty too," the alligator hisses in her ear as he goes to slice through another layer of clothing. The man licks his chops, the damp shirt shows an outline of the girl's black bra underneath, it's all that's left to undo for him to be filled with immense pleasure. The blonde squirms a little, hoping to slip free, but she stops instantly when sharp talons dig into her arm. Warm liquid mixes with the cold, rain washing away blood, but all the same sloshing across her skin. It's a searing pain, a wound that will no doubt leave a scar. The man presses his chest against her own, condensing her breasts in a painful way. A sharp inhale from the alligator makes her rear back in reflex. Sharp teeth are bared, she's assuming the scent of blood must have triggered something in his instincts. That's quite the perfume, little lady, the gator laughs at his own joke. The elongated tongue that keeps slipping free then laps up the dribbling blood. A moan elicits from the man, he presses himself against the girl a little harder. I can barely contain myself. Let's just get on with it, his predatory gaze then flicks to her skirt. The girl lets out a muffled cry, her futile struggles now increasing tenfold as she realizes what the man is about to do. The tears brimming her eyes begin to spill, streaking down her cheeks. She's powerless to stop him as a scaly hand reaches for the skirt. She contemplates closing her eyes, hoping that'll ease the approaching pain somewhat. However, movement from behind the gator catches her sight. Then, there's nothing but the hot sting of red splattering across her face. Specks of something warm cover her body now, as if a water balloon filled with paint just collided with her. It's then that the girl notices the sharp object protruding from her assaulter's chest. Even though her knife had failed, something else succeeded in piercing the gator's tough hide. The man coughs, gagging on some of his own blood. Tilting his head down to stare at the wound, he lets out a blood-curdling scream, as if he only now realized he got fatally stabbed. The girl stares at the foreign object that tore through the man's unnatural flesh. It looks like a streak of blood frozen solid, but with a mind of its own. The tentacle whips around like a tail, showing no muscle or bone tissue to restrict its movement. It moves with a flexibility that's transparent to the flow of water, but remains firm and steady. Another agonized cry for help escapes the man as he gets thrusted backwards, the tentacle protruding from his chest carrying him into the sky. Then, the gator hybrid is brought back down with immense force. The forceful effort slams the man into the street, splitting cracks into the cement and leaving behind another splatter of blood. However, the onslaught doesn't stop there, the tentacle hoists the gator back up for another round of being thrashed about. Watching the horrific display, the girl begins to quiver and falls to her knees. The man continues making a sickening wailing noise that's too distorted from gargling blood to reach beyond the block. The tentacle shows no mercy, it just keeps slashing up and down with the man as a kebab. The crater left in the road is soon filled with enough blood to make up a hot tub. If the man has a mutation quirk that gives him similar traits of an alligator, then he should be able to hold his breath underwater. At least, that's what one would think. When the man is forced back into the crater, he's pinned there this time. The blood stops just above the nape of his neck, cutting off any oxygen he may need. Bubbles begin popping at the surface, the weakened body of somebody that had been beaten trying to rear itself away. When the corpse stops resisting, 3 more tentacles rain down from above like they're part of the storm. The sound of flesh being torn apart somehow overlaps a clap of thunder. In the flash of light from the sky, like an angel, or perhaps a demon in this case, the owner of the tentacles drops down with grace. The strange appendages retreat into the person they belong to as he staggers over to the unmoving body. Dropping to his own knees, he bends down and sinks his teeth into the gator's flesh. Even with a transmutation quality, the person is still a human. Whether it counts as cannibalism or not, the gruesome tearing of teeth through meat would forever be ingrained in anybody's mind that watches it. What's even stranger is that the person who rescued the girl looks no older than 15. Despite the slim figure, it's apparent that there should be some muscle under the articles of a baggy hoodie and sweatpants. The clothes are as dark as the boy's unkempt hair, a heavy set of locks cover his left eye and leave the strange-looking right one to peer out. A red iris is shrunken down to the fraction of the pupil, surrounded by a black sclera. Webbed veins crack the void, even reaching beyond the eye and stretching across the skin that borders it. Ripping another mouthful of flesh from the corpse, the boy swallows it without bothering to chew. Like a condiment, gore surrounds his lips as if the sauce got spilled by a messy eater. It was just so enthralling to watch that the girl let out a peaked pant. However, the boy's ear twitched as soon as he heard it underneath the downpour of rain. Whipping his head up to spot the blonde that's gazing at him, he freezes like a deer in headlights. The two stare at one another for what feels like a solid 10 minutes. Both of them are so lowly crouched that they could look into each other's eyes if they wanted, but the boy looks more dazed than focused. Perhaps it's because the blonde girl is so fixated on him with her Cheshire eyes. A toothy grin and heavy blush covers her face, the freezing rain doing nothing to fade it. I'm Himiko Toga, she frantically waves with both her hands like she's trying to flag down a taxi or grab a celebrity's attention. The blonde then cranes her neck forward, as if she's trying to get a better look at the boy in front of her. What's your name? She brings her arms to her chest in anticipation of the answer. The boy is still looking at her with an appalled expression. Most people would have ran off screaming by now. Yet, this girl is still here. She even watched him feast on the guy's corpse. Now she's introducing herself and asking his name. Maybe that concussion is more severe than either of them could diagnose. Albeit reluctantly, the boy returns her greeting, Akatani. Akatani Mikumo. The giddy grin on Toga's face broadens somewhat. She's pleased with her rescuer's answer. The boy can't help but smile in response, even if it's just a small one that nobody can see through the thick coat of falling rain. An aroma of fresh coffee grains tickles his sense of smell. The gust of wind from the air condition also holds the scent of recently baked pastries, each of them displayed behind dainty glass platters. There's the slap of shoes against tile as he walks across the rustic terracotta floor. Boots are bathed in sunlight, the reflection gleaming through the window only slightly. Just ahead of him is a familiar face, albeit a few years to boot. The old friend has his arm raised just under the coffee shop's slow-turning ceiling fan. Toshinori, the hand waves in a gesture to come over so they can sit together. Toshinori chooses to oblige. The gaunt blonde grunts as he slides into the booth, a result from the strain on his bones. If not for his sickly appearance, the groan may have been a reminder of age catching up instead. Yet, his hollow cheekbones are pulled into a soft smile regardless of those health issues. Sunken eyes meet rectangular ones. It's good to see you, Naomasa. Always the detective, whether he's on or off duty, Naomasa is wearing his usual attire of a tan overcoat and slacks. A matching hat is set aside, letting his short black hair breathe a little, as well as exposing a few gray strands. It's always a pleasure. He returns the smile before sliding a menu across the table. Please, order something. It's on me. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. Toshinori tries to politely push the menu away. The food wouldn't be very good on my stomach anyways. He subconsciously places a hand over the left side of his chest. Beneath an oversized t-shirt, there's a gnarly cicatrix, the very cause for his health problems. Right. Caffeine is probably a bad idea then. Naomasa looks down with a pensive expression before returning his gaze to the blonde. Would you mind a cup of tea instead? He suggests. The blonde nervously scratches his cheek with a forced chuckle. I don't really have a choice. Doi? Nope. Naomasa pops the P as he shuts the menu. Toshinori's laughter becomes genuine after that, the wound on his side aching a little from the racking of such a frail body. Clutching the sore injury until the pain fades, he can't contain a few side-effect wheezes. The blonde lets out a cough in order to clear his throat before asking, as much as I'd like for this to be a simple friendly meeting, I assume there's a reason you called me here. Since when do we ever skip the pleasantries, Toshinori? Naomasa tries jesting the blonde a little more before letting himself give in to a stressed sigh. You're right in your assumption though. I need your help on a case. Toshinori bashfully rubs the nape of his neck. Don't get me wrong, Naomasa. I'm flattered, truly. He then hangs his head with a small shrug, but you're the detective here. I'm not exactly the best person suited for cracking a mystery by comparison. Trust me, I would have gone to Aizawa for help instead if all I wanted was half-baked conspiracy theories. Naomasa leans back with a dismissive wave of his hand. What I'm really looking for is somebody that can bring this one in for me with relative ease. The detective taps the menu as if he's pointing at a case folder instead of an overpriced croissant. Toshinori muses to himself for a few seconds, nodding in understanding. Occasionally, there's a villain that the police can't handle. That's where the pro-heroes come in to help. However, there's a variety of talented locals to choose from. Why me of all options? Toshinori has to ask. You know why. Naomasa fixes Toshinori with an intense stare. The blonde swallows his nerves, acknowledging the unsaid reason with a single nod. This is a villain that's just as elusive as the hero killer, with a body count even higher. The victims are found as mangled corpses, half-eaten and signs of torture completely evident. Naomasa briefly summarizes the information necessary for Toshinori to become determined in catching the criminal. Leaning forward in his seat, Toshinori gives the detective his complete undivided attention. Tell me their name. Naomasa locks eyes with the blonde again, gazing into blue orbs of righteousness. Everyone back at headquarters has dubbed him. He hesitates as if the name itself is evil, the tokyoghoul. I'm Mikumo Akatani. I'll be your server. Can I take your orders? Their waiter finally arrives at the table. Waiting there with a pen and pad in his hands is a boy with long dark hair, one emerald eye peering out while the other is covered by heavy locks. An apron loosely hangs around his waist, part of the coffee shop's standard employee uniform. A gray waistcoat over a white dress shirt and brown cravat makes the boy look more like an underage bartender though. Ah, yes, Naomasa is pleasantly startled from his cogitation. I'd like a coffee for myself with a touch of toffee nut. As for my friend, could you please bring him your most purifying tea? Of course, the boy nods along to the order as he transcribes it to his notepad. Once he's finished writing things down, he clicks the pen with an assumed finality, anything else, but still asks the question just in case. That'll be all. Naomasa hands his waiter the set of menus. Thank you, Toshinori says it in synchronization with the detective once the boy takes them away. Once their server leaves to place the order, the two law enforcers return to their previous discussion. I heard from Nizu that you'll be teaching at U.A this year. If that's the case, you're the best suited person with the perfect opportunity to capture this villain. Naomasa doesn't miss a beat with the continuation of his explanation. Toshinori is starting to make more sense of this meetup now. While it's true that a villain so elusive can potentially pose a threat to the majority of heroes sent to stop them, this whole thing isn't just about the case. It's not like Naomasa is asking for a big favor when Toshinori is in the local area, so that must only be an added benefit to all of this. Speaking of which, don't take this the wrong way, but I never took you for the type that would get into teaching. Naomasa laughs as he tries to shift the subject into a more light-hearted one. Toshinori only manages a smile, still not being completely content with the bait and switch of the tokyoghoul case. Neither did I, the blonde shrugs as he answers honestly. Naomasa nods along with a knowing smile, as if he predicted that's exactly what his timely friend would say. I'm going to assume there's an ulterior motive to why you chose to begin teaching heroics classes then. The detective folds his hands in a sophisticated manner. When it comes to this perspicacious posture, Naomasa shows a slight relation to Nizu's pockiness. I'm the one with an ulterior motive. Toshinori raises an eyebrow in jocular recrimination. Naomasa sheepishly rubs the nape of his neck, trying to placate the blonde with a rueful titter. I thought you said you aren't a detective. He throws in a joke for extra measure before giving his apologetic confession. I didn't arrange this just to discuss the tokyoghoul. I also wanted to see for myself if your condition has worsened or gotten better. Since your patrols have gone down to 3 hours a day and you look even more disheveled from the time I saw you last. It isn't good, is it? Toshinori softens his expression, body hunching in admittance. The smile that he had been trying to use as a mask slips away, a yielding frown in its place. I'm running out of time, Naomasa. He gives his own confession. The real reason Nizu offered me a place to teach at U.A is to potentially help find a successor. I see, Naomasa breathlessly replies. He nearly falls over, having to brace himself in the far corner on his side of the booth. Conceding to the realization that Toshinori's time as a hero is coming to an end, he almost pales more than a corpse. It's one thing to know of it, but almost near impossible for him to come to terms with. Toshinori must notice the detective's disposition, his demeanor shifting to something somber. Once Naomasa regains some of his composure though, he's able to put on a false smile to reassure his friend. We thought Night Eye was just being pessimistic when he tried telling us the necessities of finding a suitable successor. Now, the time has come. He tries to keep his voice from wobbling and abruptly stops to avoid giving in. Toshinori begins to absent-mindedly pull sugar packets out of the table's condiment container. Well, my sidekick and I aren't really on good speaking terms because of all that. His hands continue to occupy themselves by lining up the sugar bags into a row that resembles a miniature train. If Toshinori anxiously playing with the tiny packets is anything to go by, he's just as unsettled by this whole predicament. Sinking deeper into the vinyl of the booth, Naomasa finds himself feeling discouraged. That's a shame. You two really were quite the dynamic crime-fighting duo. He and the blonde look off to the side as if that's where they'll find those forgotten days. Shaking off the dull attitude, Naomasa tries to inspire some optimism by making a suggestion. He always liked coffee, right? Maybe bring him here to Antiku to share a drink and hash things out. He slaps the table for emphasis, which only accomplishes the startlement of Toshinori. The blonde gives a non-committable hum, his gaze still lingering on the sugar packets strewn across the table and purposefully ignoring Naomasa's eyes. Neither side says anything more for a solid 6 seconds, the atmosphere turning awkward as a result. It's like the detective is waiting for the person that he's interrogating to crack, but Toshinori is too nervous to steal a glance in order to check. Giving in to his own anxiety, the blonde sighs in defeat. You're right. I'll try inviting him here sometime. That must be enough to pacify the law enforcer, since he's already moving on to the next topic of conversation. You know, it was actually my sister that told me about this place. He holds a fond expression as he looks around the charmingly quaint cafe. Toshinori smiles now that they're on a subject that he can get behind. Discussing family with his friends always brings warm feelings, which is much needed after the prior conversation. Speaking of which, how is Makoto doing these days, he decides to ask. Naomasa snorts, as rebellious as always, which gains a chuckle out of Toshinori. But she's doing really good for herself. She actually graduated from college not too long ago with both a bachelor's and master's degree, he proudly proclaims. That's wonderful news. I'm so glad to hear it. Toshinori fixes his posture as he conveys his excitement for Naomasa. I've always known that she's a bright one. Oh, you have no idea how many times she's come close to figuring out your secret all on her own. Toshinori gives a nervous chuckle in response to that news while Naomasa simply carries on with his own laughter. Their waiter returns to the table with a tray then. One coffee with toffee nut. Akatani Mikumo places the mug in front of Naomasa. Careful. It's still hot, he warns. Then there's a cup of tea that's slided over to Toshinori, and I made sure to consult a few others to find our best option for you. I hope you like barley. I love barley tea. Thank you. Toshinori slightly bows his head in appreciation. Wrapping his frail fingers around the cup, the blonde brings it to his lips to take a sip. If there's anything else that you need, don't hesitate to ask. The waiter flashes his customers an earnest smile before carrying the tray back towards the kitchen. On the other hand, it's probably better to have a variety of candidates to choose from. This is a big decision after all, and you can't just pass the mantle on to the first kind-hearted kid you see. Naomasa refers to their earlier conversation about Toshinori's successor and UA. The blonde shies away, curious as to if the detective has some sort of observational skill that may have given away his thoughts about their waiter being a nice person. I wouldn't be as brash to do something like that. Toshinori isn't entirely sure if he's trying to convince himself or his friend anymore. Naomasa is too busy gently blowing on his coffee to cool it off rather than to be observational, allowing the blonde to breathe a sigh of relief. Have you reached your limit for the day or are you still planning on patrolling later? Naomasa asks before taking a small sip of java from the mug. Toshinori stops just short of taking a sip from his own drink to respond. I've still got about 2 hours left that I plan on using. He lowers the cup only slightly to get a better view of Naomasa. What's up? Did you need my help with something? He wonders. Naomasa waves in an allayed manner. Nothing urgent enough to keep you from your patrol as a hero. He pauses to take another sip of coffee before continuing. I was only going to invite you to swing by the station so we can go over the tokyoghoul case. It can wait until tomorrow though. I've got other paperwork to finish anyways. Alright. That works for me. Toshinori nods in agreement. Suddenly, the muffled noise of sirens starts to draw near. Toshinori and Naomasa turn their heads in time to watch a set of police vehicles zoom by the window in some sort of high-speed pursuit. All it takes is one shared look between the two law enforcers and they're both giving mutual nods of understanding. Next time, I'll cover the check, Toshinori promises before he downs the last of his tea. Just go, Naomasa smirks as he watches his friend briskly head towards the cafe's exit. Once the blonde steps foot outdoors, he glances each way to make sure nobody is watching him. Then, the frail form of a skeleton morphs into that of a bodybuilder. Steam generates from the solid muscles of a hero, a triumphant rictus grin etched across his face. The shift in mass isn't very hard to miss, especially when what's left behind is acknowledged by all of Japan as the #1 hero. Wah! It's All Might, a teenage fangirl shrieks with glee. The mightiful man bellows out a boisterous laugh at the odd reactions of pedestrians before launching himself into the sky with a powerful leap. Watching his friend soar over dozens of skyscrapers, Naomasa can't help but deflate somewhat. Pretty soon, that sight overhead won't be there anymore. When All Might retires, it'll be the end of an entire era. Not only is Toshinori recognized as the highest hero in rankings, but he's considered to be a literal symbol of peace. The hero always wears a massive smile in the face of danger, assuring everybody that everything will turn out okay. Good will always triumph when All Might is there. So, what about when he's gone? The detective is shaken from his musings by the loud clang of a tray clattering against the tiled floor. Glasses shatter from the impact as well, water and coffee alike spilling everywhere amok the mess. Standing at the center of it all is the one responsible, the young waiter named Akatani Mikumo. The boy's mouth is hung open, undoubtedly gawking at the receding back of All Might. Snapping out of his rumination, he begins to profusely apologize. "Sorry everybody. I'm sorry," he repeats it like a broken record while hastily picking up the shards of glass. What must be a coworker rushes over with a cloth to wipe up the spilled beverages. Naomasa chuckles to himself, appreciating what might be one of the last times he sees a kid geek out so hard over All Might. The show alone is enough of a reason to leave behind a bigger tip than usual. Placing the gray fedora on his head, Naomasa prepares to take the coffee to go. As he slides out of the booth, he leaves behind some yen. As the day goes on, nearly every customer follows suit. Some tips are hefty while others are low, but business is booming, especially after word got around on social media that All Might passed by. When the sun sets though, and day turns to dusk, the coffee shop finally closes. Akatani has the responsibility of sweeping and shutting things down for his shift though. So, after hours, he remains as the sole worker to clean everything. As he idly sweeps some stray crumbs into a dustpan, there's a sudden tapping at the door. Akatani sets the broom aside, glancing to see who's knocking. Peering through the glass is the girl that he had met the previous night. She looks like she's still wearing her school uniform and her hair is tied into messy buns just like last time. Akatani flips the lock so he can open the door for her. Stepping into the coffee house, the girl lets out an impressed whistle. "Antiku, huh?" She plops herself down into the nearest booth. "If you're curious about the name, the manager wouldn't even tell me why it's called that." Akatani locks the door again to ensure no late-night customers try to get a last-minute order in. The blonde shrugs with no sincere interest. "Not really what I meant. I was just wondering why you decided to bother working here." She even starts drumming her fingers against the table in boredom. "It has its benefits, such as free coffee, which does wonders for my quirk." Akatani pays her no mind until he finishes setting up the brewer. "Would you care for any?" "Nah. Caffeine isn't really good for my complexion." She bats her eyelashes in a teasing manner. Akatani just turns away from her, hiding the small blush that's dusting his cheeks. "So, why is coffee so good for your quirk? Is that what those tentacle things are made of?" She bounces in her seat with eagerness for an answer. Making his way to the booth so he can sit across from her, Akatani shakes his head with a dry laugh. "I wish it were something that simple." He doesn't even try to plug up the leak of depression in his tone. "I wouldn't want to scare you off, but I guess you've already seen what I really am." Himiko Toga twirls a lock of her blonde hair. "It'd be pretty rude of me to run away from the person that saved my..." "Well, you know," the natural blush on her face darkens a little bit. She ends up pulling her legs close to her chest so she can wrap her arms around the knees. "Besides, I really want to get to know you. I think it'd be super cool to be like you." She flashes a toothy grin. "Well, alright. Don't say I didn't warn you." Akatani rubs the back of his neck with lingering hesitation. "I guess you could consider it as a drawback. My quirk makes it so I can only eat human flesh." The boy flinches as he reluctantly finishes the end of his sentence. The blonde tilts her head in confusion at the action, but it soon starts to sink in that most people would likely judge him at that point. Thoughts of bullies calling him cruel names and possibly even beating him over it crosses her mind. Any ordinary person would run away screaming, not even giving the poor kid a chance to show his true personality. "Hey, it's okay." The soothing words feel strange on her tongue, but she feels obligated to say them. "I got a lot of ridicule for my quirk too. I won't judge you," she reassures him. Akatani's one visible eye widens at that news, clearly surprised to hear the confession of her relatability. "Why, your quirk," he stammers out what must be a desperate question to hear more about it. Raising one pointer finger and wagging it back and forth, Himiko tuts in a teasing manner. "You're supposed to tell me about your quirk first. Remember?" She giggles at his instinct to shyly turn away. It'd be a cute reflex if it weren't for the reason why he has it. Besides human meat, I can have coffee. It doesn't completely satisfy my hunger though. Believe me, I tried. I still try." He solemnly hangs his head as he finishes explaining the details of his unique taste buds. "Yeah, the bags under your eyes, oops. I mean I make that obvious." She jokingly covers half her own face with a hand. Akatani doesn't have the reaction she was hoping for. He doesn't look offended, per se, but he doesn't laugh either. "You make it work though," she adds as an afterthought to save him from feeling embarrassed since he seems like that type. "Thanks," she hears him say it even though it's a low mumble. "What about those tentacle things then?" She then catches his gaze with her own. "Oh, that's right. Your eye was really weird too. She can't contain her elation as she leans forward to get a closer look. Receding just a bit at the sudden lunge, Akatani self-consciously places a hand over his eye. Oh. That's just another side effect of my quirk, he recovers as he realizes she's just genuinely curious about it. Whenever I'm hungry or excited or. It just happens. I call it my tokyoghoul. Can you summon it on your own? She leans forward more with piqued interest. Slowly pulling his hand away so that she can see, Akatani slowly nods. Why, yeah, the red iris glows at the center of a black scara just like the last time she saw it. What excites her most about seeing it again though, are the veins that branch out like shattered glass. Wow, she gasps in awe before falling back with a squeal, that looks so cool. Akatani chuckles with a small smile that has the potential to melt Himiko's heart. That's probably the first time anybody ever said that to me. He catches her eye with his own. Thank you. Himiko feels her face heat up more than usual, forcing her to turn away from him. What about the tentacles? You never told me about those, she whines in the hope that he'll be too distracted by the question to notice her fierce blush. Oh, right, he jumps in his seat as if he's suddenly reminded. I call it my cocoon. It's made out of my RC cells, which is why they're as flexible as ordinary blood cells, but strong enough to fight with, he begins to mutter while trying to explain it as simply as possible. Himiko nods along like she can understand every word until he suddenly realizes that he's still murmuring nonsense. A heavy blush settles over his face as he clamps two hands over his mouth. Himiko can't suppress the laugh that breaks through her lips like water crashing through a dam. Akatani looks down at his lap with a pout. You should have stopped me. Why would I? She heaves in between giggle fits. It was just too cute. Akatani practically has steam coming out of his ears at this point. Fortunately for him, he's saved by the beeping of the coffee brewer, an indication that it's finally ready. Hastily climbing out of the booth so she doesn't see how red his face is, he starts to stammer out his own diversion. It's your turn now. Tell me about your quirk. Oh, Himiko abruptly stops laughing as she starts to deflate with her own embarrassment. I didn't think you would actually want to know, she mumbles so Akatani doesn't hear it. The boy throws her a brief glance as he pours himself a cup of coffee. I didn't catch that. Shaking herself from her self-inflicted brooding, she puts on a smile that would make some people assume she's the illegitimate daughter of All Might. My quirk allows me to turn into other people, she summarizes it to the best of her abilities. Whoa, really? Akatani nearly trips over himself as he spins around to see if she's just joshing him. That's so cool. How does it work? Do you get their quirks too? Does it only work if you turn into a girl or does it work with boys too? How does it activate? He starts spewing questions like rapid fire before lighting up as if he just had an epiphany. Do you mind if I write all of this down? Himiko stares at the boy in bewilderment. It's almost like his personality just did a 180, he went from a sulking emo to an overly excited dork. Not only that, but this is the first time that somebody showed such genuine interest in her quirk. Akatani just looks so enthusiastic about it that she doesn't have the heart to say anything other than, I don't mind. Realizing that he just geeked out over her quirk, he does a reclusive action similar to when he caught himself muttering paragraphs. Awesome. Thanks. He tries to passively play it off while grabbing a notebook that's stashed under the cashier's counter. Himiko instantly notices that the journal has some serious damage. The binder looks singed and some of the pages are sticking out as though they were torn apart at some point. Despite the condition of the book though, she can also tell that he takes it seriously since there's a label all the way at number 13. Flipping through some seared pages, he eventually lands on a blank one. Setting his cup of coffee aside, he clicks a pen and looks at her with eager anticipation. Like your quirk, most people shun me for how it's used, she reminds him before continuing, I need a person's blood so I can drink it, I then look and sound just like them. I only use it on people that I really like though. Akatani glances up from his notebook at that last part, still writing detailed descriptions from what little information she gave him. That's amazing, he exhales in awe, you would be perfect for stealth missions, whether it's as a hero or some sort of spy in the FBI. Himiko's mouth starts to slowly slide open. Nobody had ever told her she can work as a law officer, let alone a hero. She doesn't know whether to be flattered or angry, she's still too shocked. Instead, she asks, do you really mean it? Nodding enthusiastically, he only piles on more crazy compliments. There's so much potential for what you can do with your quirk. If there was some sort of assassination target, you could disguise yourself and set up the perfect ploy. If disguising as somebody else comes with any other perks, you could catch your opponent by surprise in a fight as well. He then gasps with worry, are you crying? Himiko lets out a startled gasp too, bringing a hand to her cheek where she feels a warm stream of tears. Wiping the water away with the sleeve of her cardigan, she profusely shakes her head. I'm just surprised you can be so sappy, she jokes with a laugh to boot. Laughing along, even if it's somewhat forced, Akatani slowly relaxes. I sometimes forget that's still a part of me too. He lets out a distant sigh, it's probably from my mom's side. Himiko tilts her head like a kitten trying to figure out why he looks so sad. How does SHE feel about your quirk? The blonde warily asks, since that may be the cause. Akatani's smile quickly vanishes, replaced by a woeful frown. Instantly, Himiko jumps to wave her hands in an apologetic gesture. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you, she shouts with the anxiety that he may be too upset with her to keep talking. And no. It's okay. That's not it. Akatani shifts his gaze to the notebook that's in front of him. This was actually really nice. It feels good to talk about my quirk with someone and to hear about theirs without any kind of ridicule. He runs a hand along the journal before shutting it. The last time I got to experience something like that was with my mom, actually. He continues staring at it like it's a picture of her though. Himiko nervously rubs her elbow, thankful that he isn't looking at her as she asks, do you want to talk about it? Akatani looks contemplative for a moment before he closes his eyes with a sigh, no. Sorry. Himiko nods in understanding before snapping her fingers with a grin, we can always get out of here and do something fun to forget about it instead. Akatani takes a sip of his coffee before shaking his head, not tonight. Sorry. Himiko pouts, feeling although she just backpedaled and lost all the progress of befriending the boy. She doesn't want to sound desperate, but she still decides to use a final question as her last resort. What about tomorrow? Akatani taps his chin as if he's mulling over some plans before shrugging. I could probably do something after work. Meet up here? Same time, same place? Himiko feels relief wash over her with the breeze of the building's air condition. Perfect. It's a date, then. She shoots up from her seat with excitement. Date, Akatani looks like he just blew a fuse or something. Due to the computer crash of his mind, he isn't able to register her leaving the coffee shop until she's already gone. His head hits the table, eliciting a groan from him despite the smile on his face. The night's cool breeze whips his face as he steps outside, almost like walking straight into a spider's web. To help bite back the cold nipping at him, Akatani takes a sip from the to-go cup that he filled with coffee on the way out. The heated contrast is almost enough to burn his tongue that had been nearly smitten with frostbite. The bell above the entrance jingles as he squeezes through the opening. Akatani then shuts the door, watching to see if it closes completely. With his free hand, he turns the key in order to lock it. Once he hears the familiar click that comes with the twist, Akatani slips the key back into his pocket. Waiting out front with her hair tied back into two messy blonde buns and the usual school uniform, is Himiko Toga. She gives him her trademark pointy-toothed grin with a small friendly wave in greeting. Hey Akatani-kun, a light blush dusts her cheeks as she says his name. Akatani returns her grin with a small smile and slight nod. He takes another sip from his coffee cup before replying with, Hey Toga. The petite blonde gives him a playful pout while tilting her head to the side, You're gonna hurt my feelings. We're friends, aren't we? She continues after seeing his face take on a worried expression. Friends refer to each other by their first names. Don't they? Matching the same tint of red that the girl has on her cheeks, Akatani nervously turns away. Sorry, Himiko. I don't have very many friends, so I didn't really know. He then awkwardly shuffles his feet before asking, So, what did you want to do? Treading down the sidewalk with a single skip, she happily answers the question. I was thinking you might need a disguise, Mr. Tokyoghoul. I'm gonna take you to my friend's mask shop. She glances over her shoulder to see Akatani scramble after her while trying not to spill any of his coffee. Well, I never really had a problem with hiding my face since. Akatani tries to stammer out his best attempt at a polite way of turning down the offer. Nobody ever survived to tell anyone, but starts to mumble when he realizes what he said was practically a confession of murder. Himiko keeps skipping down the sidewalk. Perhaps she didn't hear the last part or she simply doesn't care. What about the people that you save? She asks instead. What about the ones like me? She gives him a teasing flutter of her eyelashes. Akatani bashfully rubs the back of his neck with a small huff of laughter. They usually run away before they can get a good look. Himiko hums a little before giving him a small shrug. You can never be too careful. She then grabs the hand that isn't holding onto a coffee cup and drags him forward. Come on. At least give it a chance. The boy doesn't manage to utter a single syllable as he stares at the feminine hands that are gripping his own. The cool touch makes him self-aware of the heat rising to his face. Akatani tries hiding his blush with the coffee cup by drinking out of it some more. The empty street block is filled with the teenage girl's laughter as she forces him to keep pace. Air breezes by them, the two briskly cutting corners. The light pad of Himiko's shoes on the pavement play along to the tune of Akatani's heavy sneaker thuds. Akatani runs alongside her a while longer before asking, how far is this place? His voice is nearly drowned out by her joyous giggling. We'll get there faster if we take this shortcut. She suddenly yanks him in another direction. Akatani almost trips over the sidewalk's curb as she pulls him away from the street. The two tread up a small hill of grass, coming upon a long chain-link fence. It should be somewhere. Himiko briefly slows down to survey the gate before jumping with glee. Aha! Right here. Akatani hesitates as she peels back a loose section of the fence. The torn piece looks like it was dug under by a dog and then popped loose by what must have been the animal trying to squeeze through. After what might have been a few times of Himiko lifting it up more, the gate must have gotten looser. Akatani glances around to see if there are any private property signs or witnesses before following the blonde through the small gap. Once they cross to the other side, the duo must venture into a small patch of trees and bushes. Eventually, Akatani is able to spot a clearing. There's a small stone path that's dimly lit by a lamppost, a park bench underneath it. Himiko shows no shame in plucking a flower from a miniature garden, sniffing the plant like it's a freshly baked pie. Akatani has to fight the instinct to flinch back when she thrusts the flower into his face. I love their garden. Doesn't it smell so good? She asks him. Akatani gently pushes the flower away from his nose, nervously chuckling as he glances around. It starts to sink in that they're in the city's public park. However, the park is closed at this hour of the night, hence why Himiko had them sneak in. Almost like she can sense his thoughts, she waves him onward with a little reassurance. It's just a little further. We'll cut through the park and then it's just up ahead. Her cat-like eyes catch Akatani's emerald eye and it's almost like a form of hypnotism. Taking a sip of his coffee like it's liquid courage, Akatani gives her a single nod. All right. Lead the way. His feet are already moving before his voice can catch up. Himiko's Cheshire grin matches her eyes as she begins skipping again. We should come back here when they're open and go for a stroll. Himiko takes in the aroma from another patch of flowers while making the absent-minded suggestion. Akatani gives her a non-committal shrug before realizing she isn't facing his direction. Maybe, he mumbles before clearing his throat, if you'd like to. Nah, one of her light-hearted laughs makes Akatani's heart swoon a little. Parks are too sappy, a teasing tone then laces her voice as she adds, that's why I figured you'd like it. She spreads her arms while spinning like she's presenting the place. It's pretty but so boring. She stops to giggle and grin at the boy. Not that you're boring or anything, Akatani-kun. Breaking and entering is boring. The question is more or less meant to be rhetorical as a way to jest her back. You'll need to show me something fun one of these nights then. He finishes off the last of his java before tossing the cup into a garbage bin that they're passing. We're just getting started, Akatani-kun. Have a little faith in me. She raises her pointer finger as if it's some sort of declaration before aiming it at another patch of trees. The blonde diverges from the path as she asks, have you ever hopped a fence before? Akatani drawls a little as he thinks back to times that he's scaled entire buildings. I think I'll manage. Himiko must pick up on the hint of amusement in his tone, since her grin holds some humor in it too. The two step through overgrown grass that needs to be mowed and weeds that need to be plucked. Then, they come across the metal fence that surrounds the property. Himiko steps forward first, placing her foot in one of the small holes that makes a rung for her to climb on. However, she pauses for a moment as if she's hesitant, and looks back at Akatani. Don't look up my skirt. Himiko holds no real reproach in her statement as she pokes fun at the boy. However, she does find some pleasure in seeing how flustered he can get while spinning around to avoid any discomfort. Even though it's cruel to torment him any further, she still adds one last remark, or don't get caught looking, even adding a wink regardless of if he can see it or not. Himiko can't suppress a tiny giggle when she hears Akatani groan in embarrassment from behind her. After she clears the fence and lands on the other side with a soft smack of her shoes, the blonde turns around to let him know. You can look now. As a matter of fact, it's your turn, she tries beckoning him over. Akatani doesn't budge, he refuses to turn around. Is this some sort of trick to make me look up your skirt, he nervously stutters. Himiko crosses her arms with a small huff, slightly disappointed that she hadn't come up with such an idea on her own. You'll just have to peek and find out, her mischievous side pokes through before she spins on her heel to leave, otherwise, I'm going without you. Cautiously tilting his head, Akatani slowly turns it so he can see behind him. He must have been holding his breath, because there's an exhale of relief when all he sees is Himiko's receding back from the other side of the fence. Wait up, it then dawns on him that he needs to chase after her and scrambles to climb the gate too. Took you long enough, Himiko rolls her eyes as the boy jogs up from behind her. The duo start crossing a bridge that only has 2 or 3 cars passing by at a time. I didn't know what to expect. You're too unpredictable, Akatani tries to defend himself and the actions that he chose. Himiko doesn't let up on her teasing as she lightly pokes him in the chest, and you're almost too predictable. If all it takes to get you hot and bothered are words, then. Akatani covers his ears with his hands, la la la. Not listening, he shakes his head like whatever words did manage to get in will somehow get past the barriers that his hands created. Himiko playfully shoves his shoulder and the two break into a small fit of laughter. Well, it's your lucky day to avoid this conversation, 'cause we finally made it, she then announces their arrival at the mask shop. The store would have been easy to miss without Himiko's directions. Among apartment buildings and the occasional supermarket or diner, a small structure made from brick looks to be tucked away in something of a small alley. The only sign of it not being vacant are the glass door and glowing open signal that's above it. The interior proves to be vastly different from the exterior though. Neon lamps light up what looks like something a fashion designer put together. Several masks are out on display like it's an art show, some of them are even covered by tarps or kept in glass cases. As he strolls down the aisle, Akatani takes note of a plain white mask whose only variation are the occasional holes poked in it like a hockey mask would have. There also appears to be a cowl with pointed rubber ears and an equally sharp nose. It leaves a space open for the mouth and has white lens where the eyes should be. Yuta-san, where are you hiding at this time? Himiko starts trailing off to find what Akatani assumes to be the owner of the shop. Rather than follow the blonde, he continues browsing the selection. Akatani comes across a red one that's laced in what looks like a webbing design, the only diversion being the strange white spots that must be some sort of lens. However, his eyes are drawn from there to a white tarp that must be covering something considered to be a masterpiece. His curiosity getting the better of him, Akatani pulls it away. Oh, his reflex to shout in surprise and instinct to defend or fight makes Akatani settle on this dull reaction to an actual person being beneath the cloth. The man doesn't seem to be fazed by their abrupt meeting either. Yo, he then stands up, revealing just how tall and lanky he is. Dark hair like Akatani's is styled into an undercut, surrounded by piercings on his face that varies from lip to eyebrow and ear. Tattoos cover his exposed arms, there's enough to make sleeves themselves. Yuta-san, Himiko rushes over as soon as she notices him and wraps her arms around his waist for a hug. The stylist doesn't seem to care as she crushes him like a teddy bear, remaining as stiff as a board until she lets go. What are you doing? The blonde asks once she steps back. I thought I'd try to scare your friend. Yuta points a lazy finger at Akatani like his wrist is shackled down by a set of heavy chains. The rest of his fingers then unravel as he holds out his hand. I'm Yuta, by the way. Akatani returns the gesture, shaking the man's hand. Nice to meet you. I'm Akatani Mikumo. A speculative brow raises when Yuta leans in to get a closer look. I apologize if I'm making you uncomfortable, this part is a little necessary though. Yuta doesn't fully regard the boy even though he means to speak directly to him. The mask designer tilts his head as his eyes skim Akatani's face, his neck craning a little so he can take in all the features. Excuse me, Akatani scrunches up his face in confusion as Yuta's cheek nearly touches his own. It's part of his quirk, Himiko starts to explain as she sways back and forth on her heels. Yuta can take in every detail of something if he looks close enough. It's how he makes his masks for everyone. It's hard to put into words, but yes, thank you Himiko. Yuta nods along as he swaps to the other side of Akatani's face. From the corner of his exposed eye, Akatani sees Yuta's hand flinch as though it wants to part his hanging hair. May I? The designer surprisingly asks for permission first. Akatani shrugs and Yuta takes that as a yes, carefully lifting the dark locks. Himiko stops swaying on her heels, leaning forward completely now to get her own glimpse of what's underneath. There's only another emerald iris. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I'll admit that I'm mildly disappointed. He lets the strands of hair fall back into place. Yuta then waves Akatani over to a stool, patting the empty seat as a gesture for him to sit down. Let's get started then. He waits for the boy to follow before adding, firstly, a few questions. Do you have any allergies? Perhaps to rubbers or metals? Not that I'm aware of. Akatani shrugs as he tries to think of anything notable and comes up empty. Do you want a full-faced one? I personally find beginners prefer to have half-faced ones for their first time. Yuta taps a finger against his chin as he mulls over his customer's appearance one last time. Akatani has to resist the urge to shrug again, instead opting for a soft hum. I'll leave it to you to decide, he replies before noticing the strange mask that's on the crafter's table nearby. Surrounded by tools such as scissors and pins or needles, lays a magenta mouthpiece that's shaped like a beak. What about that one? Akatani nudges his head in that direction for Yuta to look. Ah, that's for another one of my clients. There's actually a whole assembly line of those for him and his friends. Were you interested in one like that? Yuta glances between the mouthguard and Akatani's chin. Akatani regards it for a moment before shaking his head. I'd rather not look like a cockatoo. He then jumps in his seat at the realization that his remark might upset the designer. No offense. Yuta chuckles instead, with his own small headshake. No offense taken. The design choice was mostly his idea anyway. A plague mask. The designer rolls his eyes like the thought of it alone is silly. How pretentious. Yuta works his way around Akatani, grabbing the clump of hair that covers an eye again and weighing it in his hand. I didn't really care for this particular style at first, but it suits you. It gives me an idea. Akatani peers up at him as he waits to hear more, but the designer appears to be too fixated on the hair to notice until later. Oh, pardon me. I was just thinking aloud. Akatani feels a small smile tug at the corners of his lips, but it quickly subsides. I can relate, he admits while glancing at Himiko to see if she's listening in or not. The blonde got to experience that side of him firsthand back at Antiku, a side of him that he thought had been long forgotten. Yuta hums a short tune as he dons a pencil and notepad to write in. Interesting. That makes me wonder what else I should ask you. He nibbles the eraser side before using it to point at Akatani. Mikumo-kun, do you happen to have any lovers? That particular question seems to break whatever social barrier the boy had put up. Wah, he jumps in his seat, almost knocking the stool and himself over. No. I've never had one. The recovery holds a shyness to it that only interests Yuta even further. I see. Could it be that you find girls younger than you cuter than the same age? Or is it the other way around? Could it be that you like older girls instead? If not for the genuine curiosity made evident by Yuta, one would think this were an interrogation. I guess if our ages are close, then it doesn't really matter. Akatani holds an uncertainty as he tries to stammer out a proper response. See, can I ask you something, Yuta-san? He peers at the designer from the corner of his eye. You ask me something. Yuta's eyes widen as if he just saw a new color for the first time. Now that's interesting. Please, go ahead. Well, Akatani turns away with the concern that his question may disappoint the designer. I was just wondering. Is there a connection to these questions and making a mask? Very much so. Yuta nods like it's common knowledge before elaborating. The more that I know about you and your personality, the greater my motivation will be. Oh, Akatani lifts his head up in understanding. That makes sense. Yuta then cranes his neck with a burst of excitement, his nose just mere centimeters from Akatani's. As if he just had the epiphany, he asks, what about Himiko? Do you think she's cute? Akatani feels his face flush red and instinctively covers it with his arms. Can we not talk about girls anymore? He pleads while peeking through his sleeves to see if Himiko happened to hear what had been asked. The blonde appears to be in her own little world, browsing the masks on display a few feet away, which allows some comforting relief. Yuta gets behind Akatani, a smirk on his face. I think I understand you now, Mikumo-kun. You're a person with a lot on their mind. He strolls back around to the opposite side so Akatani can see him again. But you don't have very much to say. Do you? He mimes an invisible zipper being closed across his lips and tosses the equally invisible key. Akatani is about to make some sort of retort, but stops short and slowly nods in agreement. Yeah. I guess you're right. His admittance isn't very enthusiastic though. Well, In any case, I believe I have everything I need. Yuta begins shooing Akatani off of the stool. I'll need a few days to work on the mask. You two kids go have some fun and come back during the weekend. Oh, okay. Thank you, Yuta-san. Akatani staggers a little as he's ushered towards the exit. Once there, he gives a small bow in appreciation. Bye, Yuta-san. Himiko drags his name out as she waves to him on her way out. Akatani pauses once he notices a vending machine and makes his way over to it. There's a canned coffee that he selects with a hot or cold selection. He chooses the hot coffee. As the canned beverage drops into the compartment below for him to take, Himiko skips on over. So, what did you think? She asks him while tucking her arms behind her back. It was cool. Akatani pops the lid open so he can take a sip. Thanks for taking me. Himiko points an accusing finger up at him. Told you so? Her taunting is followed by the usual laughter that Akatani has come to enjoy hearing. The two then carry on into a leisurely stroll down the sidewalk, with no particular destination in mind. We'll call it a draw. He turns the next corner so she doesn't see the small smile he has from teasing her back. That's no fair, Akatani-kun. She protests like a kid throwing a temper tantrum, by hopping up and down while waving her arms in an exaggerated manner. I won fair and square. Just admit it, she huffs and puffs. All right, he shakes his head since that sort-off display was his breaking point. A grin etches across his face as he looks at her, but consider this payback for back at the fence. Himiko looks baffled at first, but almost instantly mimics his toothy smile. You'll need to try better than that to get one over on me. She quickens her pace as if putting a short distance between them will give her the last word. Oh, come on, I had you completely fooled. Akatani chases after her with a bemused laugh. In your dreams, she lightly shoves him once he draws near. It's probably where you get to see up my skirt too. Okay, I'm not going to go there. Akatani raises both his arms as a sign of surrender. One hand lays flat to show his palm while the other continues to cling to his canned coffee. Too easy. Himiko keeps a victorious grin on her face. The way she struts next to him is almost too sly, but it's mostly meant as a form of mockery. The two then fall into a comfortable silence as Akatani drinks from his can of coffee. The bitter sensation on his tongue is vaguely familiar to the blood that drains from biting into a person's flesh. While that particular similarity is unsettling to him, it's better than the alternative when it comes to his opinion on the matter. However, that may vary. It isn't just when his hunger overtakes him that he enjoys feasting on a corpse, but the occasional times where he's exhilarated by the capability of ripping into a criminal. Even if the person is a villain, he can't help but get disgusted with himself for feeling that way. It's like whatever humanity remained inside of him started slipping away. He never told Himiko the second reason for working at Antiku, to remain as a member of civilization, to remain human. He doesn't have to though. Since he feels the most human when he's with her, and the best part is she knows about his quirk to understand that unspoken matter. By the way, I heard All Might is in the neighborhood. Himiko snaps him out of his musings by mentioning the symbol of peace. As if the hero's name itself is a trigger word, Akatani practically freezes in place, his body stiffening like he was caught red-handed during a crime. Akatani-kun? Himiko slows to a stop as she realizes that he's come to a halt. Himiko. What do you think of All Might? He avoids eye contact with her as he asks the question. The inquiry isn't necessarily meant to be a test for her, but that's how it feels for both of them when it comes to whatever answer gets given. The blonde smile wavers a little, as if she's saddened by whatever thoughts get accumulated in her own head. What do you think of All Might? She throws Akatani's own question back at him instead of answering it herself. Akatani stares at the canned coffee in his hand as if it had personally offended him, his grip tightening just enough to crush the metal a tad. I used to adore heroes. Especially All Might. The boy scoffs with a feigned laugh. I guess there isn't a kid that would think otherwise. Do you not like heroes anymore, Akatani? Himiko hesitantly asks him as she moves closer. She's like a child hearing a bedtime story for the first time, her attention completely devoted to the boy's response. The blonde flinches when he raises his head up, but the gaze misses her completely and focuses on the sky above them. Like he's staring up at All Might himself, his eyes glimmer in the pale moonlight as if tears are bound to be shed. Heroes are a lot like doves. Himiko tilts her head as she tries to understand what he's saying. Doves soar over everybody. They fly above the people on the ground who continuously look up at them with admiration. Doves. They're symbols of peace too. Why? These birds, they look the part of an angel, but they don't do anything. Nobody looks at them the same as a vulture or a buzzard since those birds are considered disgusting. Just because those animals rip into what's on the ground, what everyone refuses to see on the ground, they're considered ugly too. Personally, I think the bird that's willing to come down from its flight shows more bravery as a hero. Himiko recalls the time that she found a wounded dove. A toddler stumbling across the bird that broke its wing, the little girl taking it so she can nurse it back to health. The dove was so pretty, so cute. Just like Akatani said, she sank her fangs into it like a vulture and got ridiculed like she was something disgusting. Slowly, the blonde takes his free hand. Her fingers interlock with his, her soft and cool skin pressing against his rough and warm palm. Akatani's head whips down in surprise to see it, the surprise making him swallow something dry. Himiko continues holding his hand since he doesn't say or do anything to protest. Unlike the first time that she guided him this way, she gently tugs in the direction she wants to steer the boy. "Wanna drink something other than coffee?" Himiko asks a rhetorical question, but Akatani's eye shifting into its kakugan state is enough of an answer. Toshinori Yagi steps off the elevator and into the fray of hard-working law enforcers. Officers run back and forth in order to deliver documents to their coworkers or to answer ringing telephones. The frail blonde nearly gets trampled by a plump detective that tries to brush by. Even the slackers by the water cooler look out of breath. Regardless, he somehow makes it to his friend's office unscathed. Another quiet night at the precinct. Toshinori leans against the doorframe as he greets Naomasa with some sarcasm. The joke gets a chuckle out of his friend and puts a grin on the blonde's face as a result. "Thanks for stopping by." Naomasa pauses as if he's only now noticing the cluttered paperwork across his desk. "Sorry for the mess." Toshinori both metaphorically and quite literally waves it off as no concern. "It's not a problem." He steps forward to help the detective organize the folders in a dented filing cabinet. Taking a second glance, the paint looks a little faded and the desk appears to have a few splinters on it. The police department must not be receiving as much funding as it used to now that pro-heroes are gaining traction in their popularity. "Did you happen to foil any muggings on your way over?" Toshinori's grin stretches a little since he finds some humor in Naomasa's way of making small talk. "Nope. Aside from a robbery this morning, Muzutafu has been as quiet as a mouse." The blonde slides the last folder into the cabinet before it gets slammed shut. "You've noticed it too," Naomasa continues when he sees the perturbed expression on Toshinori's face. "Criminal activity is higher during the day. At night though, it's nearly as rare as finding a unicorn in comparison to somebody shoplifting." "Now that you mention it, that's odd." Toshinori rubs his pointed chin in contemplation. "Most villains do the opposite. They operate at night in order to avoid the heroes who patrol the area." Aizawa had a theory. Naomasa begins digging through folders that are kept in his desk drawer. Apparently, he did some cross-referencing and finally found a connection between all of the tokyoghoul's victims. The detective stops skimming the documents when he spots the one that he's looking for, slapping it on the table and flipping the file open. They all share a criminal background. Every single one. Naomasa spreads out the crime scene images for Toshinori to see better. "We're dealing with a vigilante?" Toshinori glances up at his friend with some skepticism. "When it comes to how much of a body count there is, it's hard to believe it could be a coincidence. However, each corpse is so mangled that the comparison to serial killers such as Moonfish could be made. Something doesn't add up." Aizawa's theories are starting to seem not so far-fetched anymore. Naomasa settles on a pensive frown as he schemes the papers. The two are snapped out of their cognition when a police officer with the head of a ginger tabby comes stumbling into the room. "Sir, there's been a bank robbery." He pants like he's out of breath from running to the office. "Tamakawa," Naomasa exclaims in shock before taking on a stern and reprimanding tone, "I told you I would be in a meeting and any interruptions would not be tolerated unless it has to do with the tokyoghoul." The cop speaks in between heavy breaths, "But sir, the robbery." He shakes his cat-like head with a pant. The officer's large yellow eyes meet Naomasa's brown rectangular ones. "It's a blood bank. The sky may as well be a black canvas tonight, the tiny stars and faded moon being no different from white specks yet to be painted over. Its natural darkness only gleams with a periodic hue of dark blue, the red side of a police car's flashing lights not radiating bright enough. Cool colors reflect off of smudged windows, shimmering in the night. The vehicle sirens are off, leaving only idle radio chatter and the scrape of shoes against cement to fully confirm police are present. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi and his subordinate, Sansa Tamakawa, duck under police tape that's meant to seal off the blood bank's entrance. Naomesa's eyes search the doorway for any signs of forced entry, but any chipped wood looks like it's due to being weathered than any other reason. Toshinori Yagi treads as slowly as humanly possible behind them, not wanting to disrupt them during their investigation. The dim lighting from inside casts a long shadow over sickly yellow walls. Where a receptionist would normally be to greet the men, sits a decaying desk with an empty seat behind it. There's a stray cigarette, but that's sitting in an ashtray which stopped burning, but there's also a lingering scent of smoke. The fumes settle on the tongue, leaving a bitter taste that sours when meshed with the smell of blood spillage wafting through the air. The soft crunch of glass between Toshinori's foot and the brown-tiled floor draws their attention to the ground. Large drops of blood gradually lead to even bigger puddles, almost like a trail. One could make the assumption that it's due to a person bleeding out, but shattered glass on the ground and missing vials from shelves tell a different story. Here, Naomesa digs into the pocket of his overcoat as he suddenly remembers something very important. Everyone put these on. The detective hands Tamakawa and Toshinori a pair of blue sanitation gloves so they don't contaminate anything before slipping on his own. Naomesa crouches down on one knee so he can make a closer inspection. Normally, it'd be the job of the CSI unit waiting outside to collect any remaining evidence. However, yellow markers that are placed indiscriminately lets him know they already sweep the building. It's just his job to go over whatever remains and to pick up the broken pieces. Quite literally in this case. Naomesa gently takes a shard of glass, his fingers smudging the red bodily fluid that's on it. None of this has dried, so the heist must have been fairly recent. Tamakawa mutters Naomesa's thoughts aloud for him so Toshinori can get a sense of the crime scene too. Born with a quirk that gives Tamakawa cat-like attributes, he also shares some of the animal's qualities, such as heightened senses. The officer's nose flares as it catches another whiff of the smell drifting around. The cigarette smoke remaining present tells them not much time has passed, and the fresh blood practically confirms it as a plausible assumption. We've got squad cars fanning the perimeter. Something will come up if the perp is still in the area. Naomesa turns his head just enough to look at Toshinori so he can make sure the hero doesn't go to perform his own manhunt. When the blonde doesn't run off, the detective uses his knee as a brace to push himself back up before adding, "The chances that we'll find anyone are slim though. There's no certain way of knowing how much time has passed and how far one could get, especially if they're as elusive as the tokyoghoul. I thought that the tokyoghoul was more colorful with their crimes." Toshinori doesn't bother hiding the displeasure in his tone or the frown on his face. The lack of sanitation there is enough to make his skin crawl all on its own. There's no need to add the recollection of those victim images into the mix. You're right, Naomesa pulls at the latex around his wrist. While this particular appetite does sync up with our perps, the glove comes off with a slight snap of whiplash. It doesn't match the tokyoghoul's MO. Tamakawa chimes in with, "This might be a copycat of some sort," earning a collective look of mild amusement from Toshinori and Naomesa. The police officer's ears flatten as he becomes sheepish, only now realizing he made an accidental pun. Oh, or someone new. He bashfully scratches the nape of his neck while shyly turning away from them. I would be inclined to agree. Each member of the trio whirl around to face the voice of a newcomer. Tamakawa is mostly startled by the stealthiness of a tall and slender man, whereas Naomesa and Toshinori are just bewildered. Once he steps out from the shadows, they begin to recognize him by his ragged appearance. The man wears a black outfit that's tucked in at his boots, no doubt meant to help him blend in with the night's atmosphere. The only distinctive features on his costume appear to be a wrap scarf and small utility belt. Otherwise, he could probably pass himself off as a hobo, what with his unkempt facial hair and shoulder-length bangs that partially hang over his face. Despite looking like he just rolled out of bed and still remaining to be worn out, the trio know better. This is a pro-underground hero in their presence. Eraserhead's eyes look half-opened and just as tired as he feels, but still hold a carefully calculative glare. The flat stare flicks from Tamakawa to Naomesa, although I just so happen to have another plausible theory. Naomesa's shoulders sag as he lets out an exasperated sigh, almost like he's a deflating balloon. Please, Aizawa, I'm already annoyed enough as it is. The detective massages his forehead with his index finger and thumb as if he's trying to soothe an oncoming migraine. Don't go adding your theories to my frustration. Hold on, Tamakawa rests his hand on Naomesa's shoulder in an allaying manner. We don't have much to go off of here. It wouldn't hurt to get his professional opinion. The officer glances at Toshinori with a supplicating expression. Come on, let's hear him out. The blonde shoots his own glance at Naomasa, the two sharing a look that's somehow verbal enough for the detective to give in. Sighing again, but this time his shoulders rolling back in preparation for what's to come, Naomasa chooses to appease his subordinate by gesturing for Aizawa to continue. Eraserhead tilts his head in the direction that he wants them to follow before treading down an aisle of shelves. Leaking vials leave streams of blood that end up winding towards a pool of scarlet. It's almost like the epicenter of it all, several splattered footprints covering the tile there. Aizawa gives the others a moment to track the indentions towards an alley door, no doubt the exit that the perp used to leave. Whoever did this wasn't alone. The trio shoot Aizawa all sorts of perplexed looks. Noticing that they aren't entirely convinced, he explains. The footprints here are crossing each other. It's too much of an irregular pattern to only be one person, especially when it's overlapping the other steps. His hand gestures in a lazy manner as an attempt to show them. Naomasa shakes his head while trying to stifle a groan. That doesn't prove anything at all. The perp could have just simply retraced their steps. He crosses his arms in an exaggerated display of disappointment before asking, "Are you done wasting our time yet?" Aizawa keeps his deadpan expression while giving a wry response, "No. I haven't gotten to the best part yet." The underground hero then casually uses his foot to nudge an evidence marker elsewhere. Before Naomasa can do any scolding or reprimanding, Aizawa points to the particular place that he moved it to. The shoe sizes vary vastly. The imprints are side by side for anyone to see that one is smaller than the other. There are 2 culprits minimum. Tamakawa covers his mouth with his arm, feigning a cough to cover up the huff of amusement he gets at seeing his superior outsmarted. Even Toshinori looks like he's trying to keep a grin at bay, though his is more likely to be part of the jesting that comes with friendship. Naomasa throws his arms up in irritation. "Okay. You've made your point." Before crossing them again, that doesn't prove it was the tokyoghoul though. As a matter of fact, it only further suggests that it wasn't. As far as we know, he's acted alone and solely operates as a vigilante of sorts. Which leads to my belief that he was coaxed into doing this. Aizawa gives the detective a sly glance before addressing Toshinori and Tamakawa. As mentioned, the tokyoghoul has acted alone, picking off criminals during the night. It started with low-tier thugs, ones that were hard to decipher as crooks when their first offense was the same night that they died. As such, these criminals were simply purse snatchers or muggers. Our ghoul then slowly escalated to higher-ranked villains, like a predator finding its place in the food chain. Your point, Aizawa, Naomasa interjects without hiding his annoyance, an ever-present scowl on his face. My point is that we prayed the ghoul wouldn't find its place in the food chain since that's likely even higher than its present place. Aizawa fixes Naomasa with his own scowl. This is a step down. The prayer is answered. Now you have to ask yourself, what could have stopped something like that just when it's about to reach the highest peak? The answer is a significant other. Naomasa gives a dry laugh that's just short of being sardonic. Give me a break. You're saying the tokyoghoul has a lover. The rhetorical question is meant to be condescending but only ushers Aizawa to further explain. Eraserhead points at the footprints again, meaning to draw attention to the shoe sizes in particular. It might not just be fitting the foot that makes this difference so conceivable. It would also make sense for one of these to fit a female whereas the other fits a male. Aizawa catches the rectangular eyes of Naomasa with his flat ones. The other possibility for why these shoe sizes are so small brings me back to another theory I had. If I'm not mistaken, we might be dealing with children. A kid. Toshinori is unable to refrain from making an outburst of disbelief. The brooding look that crosses the blonde's gaunt features don't do the right amount of justice in conveying his inner turmoil. He's heard of troubled youth, but this is beyond that. As the symbol of peace and Japan's #1 hero, he feels like he's personally to blame for such a travesty. How could a kid? He chokes up on his own emotions before overpowering them with an angry shout. A child? How could someone so young do such gruesome things? It's easy for children to become misguided. Such underdeveloped minds may think they have no other choice. Aizawa's expression softens with his tone as he tries to placate the blonde. It might not seem like much of a change in direction, stealing versus murder, but we can thank whoever gave them an alternative. It's better than nothing. It starts as a slow shake, but slowly increases in speed. Naomasa might just suffer a concussion from turning himself into a life-size bobblehead. Yui reaching too far on this. It's only a hunch with no real justifiable proof. It's too sudden and it's far too drastic of a shift in motive. The detective groans before adding, I'll throw you a bone and admit there's a likelihood of two culprits here, but that's all. Quit while you're ahead. There are quirks with drawbacks worse than others. Aizawa reaches into one of the various pouches on his utility belt. I have dry eye every once in a while that can lead to vision deterioration if not treated. The underground hero applies the eye drops that he pulled out. Someone with gills may be required to constantly stay submerged in water in order to survive. There's a possibility that the tokyoghoul has a similar drawback. It's not uncommon for quirks to show signs of aggression or to have cannibalistic urges either. Aizawa blinks his eyelids a few times once he's finished before putting away the drops. If we truly are dealing with a kid in this scenario, it's even more likely for them to believe this is the only option. Until now, Toshinori comes to the same conclusion as Aizawa once he mulls it over. If the child needs blood or something of the sort to stay alive, then taking from here instead of killing a person means they have no real desire to harm anyone. A small but hopeful smile starts to form on the hero's face. Tamakawa purrs in satisfaction, equally enthused by the potential of a breakthrough in the investigation. He stops to scratch behind his triangular ear before asking, does that mean we should scratch out the vigilante classification now? He winces when he realizes he made another unintentional pun. Nobody seems to notice besides Aizawa, whose eyes sparkle with more amusement than his expression. One night doesn't mean the rest will be any different. Naomasa supplies his uncertainty with a shrug. We hadn't had a vigilante as violent since Stendhal, the only difference being that Psycho was short-lived and mainly used a katana. Aizawa hums in agreement before contemplating the rest out loud. Most vigilantes don't cross the line of the law any further than illegal quirk usage. Adding manslaughter is too black. They prefer the gray area that they created in between the white. And where exactly is the line that's supposed to be drawn between those colors? Toshinori solemnly asks from his sulking disposition. What's the difference between a vigilante or a villain if killing isn't it? The controversial question might seem rhetorical to the underground hero, detective, and police officer, but Toshinori genuinely wants the answer when it involves a kid. Tamakawa's ears bend as he takes the blonde's words into consideration. You're asking if theft is more of a step over that line than murder. It's more of a grim statement than a question at this point. The cop glances in the direction of his superior, hoping Naomasa might have the answer. Even the detective looks lost in thought, his pensive gaze directed at the floor. As absurd as that thought might seem, it isn't completely illogical. There have been justifiable murders, ones done in self-defense for instance. When put bluntly, maybe there is no line, maybe it's just one big splotch like the blood covering the floor. The real difference in villainy or vigilantism may be whether you love seeing your reflection in that puddle or recoil in disgust. Aizawa finds no real answer for anyone except, who knows what'll be the worst thing the ghoul does if they do become a full-blown villain. The crisp shadows shrouding them start to burn away as light gleams in. Vials shimmer under the sun's glare, naturally brightening the room little by little. Hues of orange blend with the red tint, creating a vibrant color that welcomes the morning. Toshinori turns towards the light, closing his eyes as he relishes in its warmth. The blonde bathes in it, the frown on his face curling upwards only slightly. When he opens his eyes, his blue reflects the sky. Clearing his throat to gather the other's attention, he throws a thumb over his shoulder in order to excuse himself. It's about time for my morning commute. I should get going. He checks his wrist for a watch that isn't there before adjusting the sleeve to cover it. Oh, Naomasa snaps out of his cognition when he notices the hero is leaving. I'll give you a call if anything changes and send the rest in the mail then. The detective waves a farewell to his friend as the blonde backs away. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Naomasa, Toshinori shouts over his shoulder as he turns and jogs out the door. Once out of sight, the blonde ducks into an alley where nobody can see his transformation and becomes the pro-hero acknowledged by everyone as All Might. Fragile limbs buff up in a matter of seconds, a massive grin spreading across Toshinori's face as he triples in size. The hero takes flight, bounding over buildings in a single hop, guffawing all the way into the troposphere. This is going to leave me an unholy amount of paperwork to fill out, Naomasa complains as he rubs the bags that are beginning to develop under his eyes. While the creases and wrinkles are nothing compared to Aizawa's, the detective wouldn't be far behind. Be sure to fax it over to me when it's finished. The underground hero remains monotone as he treads in the same direction that Toshinori went. Revealed to have been concealed under the capture cloth that's wrapped around his neck and shoulders like a scarf, Eraserhead pulls a pair of yellow goggles over his eyes. The specialized lens leaves only a few slits in them, hiding the direction of his gaze. On his way out, he gives the detective a bidded farewell. In the meantime, I've got another lead that I intend to follow up on. Tamakawa places his hands on his hips as he surveys the empty space. Looks it's going to be one of those kinda days. His whiskers bend with his half-hearted smile. Naomasa sighs in predetermined exhaustion, matching the fellow policeman's attitude. In that case, he pulls off the other sanitation glove before tucking his hands into his overcoat's pockets. I'm gonna need a cup of coffee. When Antiku opens its doors to Muzurafu in the morning, wave after wave of customers come bustling in for a taste of Java. Lines form out the door sometimes. There's been the occasional circumstance of people bringing lawn chairs to seat themselves during the busy hour. This is another one of those instances. To call it a breakfast rush would be downplaying the crowd. Servers run back and forth as they scramble to serve customers their morning due. Amongst them is Akatani Mikumo, one of the best workers Antiku has to offer. The boy weaves in between tables as he sets down cups of tea or mugs of steaming coffee. Once the tray that he carries is empty, he swivels back around to walk briskly towards the kitchen for another round. There's a customer that asks for napkins on the way, to which Akatani politely obliges. A fortunate waiter wouldn't come across any extra interruptions, but this particular teen finds himself in the most unfortunate of predicaments all the time, so he stopped once again. Thin arms wrap around his midsection, just above his waist and below his chest. The petite form pulls him into what must be a hug from behind, something soft pressing against his back momentarily. Startled by what feels like a sneak attack, Akatani breaks loose from the grip and spins around to face whoever grabbed him. Surprise, a familiar blonde greets him with a squeal of joy. Himiko, Akatani shouts in shock once he recognizes the petite girl. The boy glances in each direction as he realizes they're standing in the center of the cafe. In an attempt to avoid getting waylaid, Akatani gently takes Himiko by the wrist and guides her to a less populated corner. Can't you see we're packed? I've gotta work, I can't get fired. He keeps his voice down and tone low in the effort to keep a low profile. But I'm bored, Akatani, Himiko pretends to whine as her lip curls into a feigned moo. I just might regret giving you the address to this place, Akatani jokingly mumbles to himself as he shakes his head in bewilderment. From the single eye that peers out from his overgrown hair, he notices a small table meant for two has been cleared. Here. Have a seat and just wait. I'll bring you a cup of coffee. Akatani gestures to the chairs so she can see them too before backing away so he can flee into the kitchen. Himiko plops into the seat with a small huff. The girl had so much fun the previous night that she couldn't wait to spend another one with the boy. What Himiko assumed would be a cure for whatever boredom started stirring in her stomach only left her with even less to do. There's nobody sitting in the chair across from her to talk with, there's no television set mounted up anywhere, there's not even any music playing from a radio. Left with nothing else to do, she starts playing with the sugar packets left out for customers to use. She picks through the pink and white, finding those colors cuter than the light blue ones. Once those run out, Himiko slumps in the chair as boredom overwhelms her again. Akatani takes a swig from his own coffee before grabbing the one for Himiko, a to-go cup with a lid just in case she were to leave or accidentally spill it. He hadn't bothered with any sugar or specialties, having not gotten the chance to learn her preferences yet. Instead, Akatani snags some creams and sweeteners for her to personally choose from. The boy scampers back to the blonde, flashing her a benevolent smile once she sees him turn the corner with everything tucked under his arms. Even when he's swamped with other customers, he tries his best to serve her specifically. I didn't know what you'd want, so I just kinda grabbed everything on hand. He gives her a diffident chuckle while sheepishly scratching the back of his head. Ah, Akatani, you shouldn't have. The coy teasing leaves them both blushing. When the flushed faces lose a bit of their heat, Himiko's coy smirk forms into a grin. She shows him a vial of blood that was taken from the previous night. See? I brought my own blend. Akatani's exposed eye widens in an initial shock, the recognition evident in the small twinkle of his iris. The anxiety that comes from panic makes him shoot a worried glance over his shoulder before bringing his focus back to the vial of blood. Try not to let anyone see that, he whispers in a voice laced with concern. Himiko rolls her eyes like he's being overdramatic. Relax. Nobody is gonna notice. The red liquid pours into the cup of coffee like an ordinary sort of creamer before she stashes away the empty vial. It's not like anyone will be able to tell what it is either, she says in reassurance while stirring the concoction with a spoon. You can never be too careful, Akatani shoots another worried glance towards the people behind him before gritting his teeth in what looks like resistance. The pupil of his eye seemingly shrinks as it turns a shade similar to the blood that was mixed with coffee. There's a dry swallow from the boy as it returns to normal. Besides, it's more meant for me than them, he timidly mumbles in admittance. Himiko gawps a little as she realizes they're more similar than she previously thought. You get an urge for blood when you see it, don't you, Akatani-kun? She cranes her neck as she tries to get a closer look at him. His eye continues to display a constant shift of appearance, the only way to truly recognize Akatani's inner struggle. Any ordinary glance at the boy wouldn't uncover his hidden bloodlust, but Himiko is able to fully notice this side of him. She's able to fully understand it since she empathizes with this desire too. It's okay to give in. Here. Have some. She slides the cup towards him while trying to make her voice as soothing as possible. Akatani stares at the drink with reluctance before the gaze flicks back to Himiko, almost like he's checking for permission. The hesitance doesn't last very long though, he doesn't even wait to get that confirmation that she thought he was seeking. Akatani snatches the cup from the table, taking a big swig of it, practically chugging it. When he's finished, he lets out a satisfied sigh, a bit of liquid dripping from his lips before his tongue laps it up. Himiko's mouth continues to hang open as she watches his every move. It's almost like he's constantly starving, completely deprived of what he wishes to taste. The small content he has from what he swallows though, she sees it in his features. A grin begins to form on her face, starting small and stretching bigger. The girl fully understands now, seeing herself in the boy. Two identities that contradict one another, the conflicted mind that draws them together just as much as it brings them apart, they both share this quality. She snapped from her musings by the chime of the coffee shop's front door. A man wearing a tan overcoat takes off his matching hat once he steps inside, ever the gentleman. The green tie he wears with a pair of slacks and dress shoes makes her brush him off as a mundane businessman. She'd much rather keep her attention on Akatani Mikume, the interesting specimen that is giving her an apologetic look. I'm sorry. I've got to take this customer. He points a thumb over his shoulder in the plain guy's direction. Thanks for letting me try your coffee blend. The joke that's meant to be lighthearted isn't very funny when his voice cracks with the lack of sincerity. She can tell that the expression on his face is fabricated, that it isn't a real smile like the one she had seen those previous nights. No, beneath the mask that he's made, Akatani wears a face of self-inflicted shame. Himiko wants to tell him so much, that there's no reason to be ashamed, but he's already walking away. Naomasa waits patiently for a worker to notice him, hands in pockets and head down as he contemplates the crime scene that he just left. Aizawa left him with a lot on his mind, and the morning rush of customers at Antiku leaves him with the time to go over it all. The thought of two culprits being responsible for the blood bank heist is enough of an issue, but linking it with the tokyoghoul and saying they have a partner makes it a whole lot worse. In all honesty, Naomasa would prefer to make this robbery an entirely different case file and let it collect dust on a shelf with no real resolve to close it. The complications that come with tacking on an accomplice to the elusive ghoul outweigh a simple burglary. The detective bites his tongue like he spoke the thought out loud, enough to cause pain but not enough to draw any blood. A tide of shame washes over his mouth instead, cleaning it out like his saliva had been doused with soap. There was a time when he would never think about dismissing a case, no matter what it is. Naomasa had always been the most honest cop on the force. He had even been dubbed with the nickname, True Man, and it wasn't just because of his lie detection quirk. Whether it was from all the stress that comes with trying to catch the tokyoghoul or how many years he's had on the job, he can't help but wonder what happened to himself. The thought that isn't so easily dismissive crosses his mind. Is there a difference between the identity of that noble detective called True Man and Naomasa Tsukachi? Toffee nut, right? The detective is drawn from his rumination by a familiar-looking barista. Whether it's done deliberately or not, half the boy's face is covered by his dark shade of hair. One might say it's the most defining feature that keeps him from looking plain. An emerald eye peers up with what can only be described as kindness, seemingly waiting on the detective's response. Yes, Naomasa is taken back by the waiter's ability to know what he was going to order. How'd you guess? Your quirk, a genuine curiosity that has to do with the detective's instinct to uncover mystery sparks from it. In retrospect, it wouldn't be that bizarre if the server had something along the lines of precognition. It'd make sense for a business such as this to hire him for it specifically. The boy's laugh sounds lighthearted to the unobservant ear, but the faint sense of gloom isn't covered completely. He wouldn't be winning any Emmys this year. I don't have a quirk as cool as that. His voice is distant but rises in pitch as if it comes closer when he focuses back on Naomasa. I only knew your order because I remembered it from last time. Suddenly, it clicks as to why the waiter looks so familiar. Naomasa refrains from slapping a palm into his face, feeling a tug of guilt for not remembering the boy's name. The kid had served him and Toshinori just the other day, yet the detective had completely forgotten. Ah, forgive me, he gives the barista a slight bow to apologize. The gesture is mostly meant to serve as a distraction though. It's the detective's attempt to stall for time as he tries to recall the boy's name. Running a hand through his equally black hair, minus the gray strands, he's forced to surrender with a bashful smile. I completely forgot. I'm sorry. He lingers on the end to let the waiter know that he's asking for their name. Akatani Mikumo, and it's fine. I'm pretty forgettable when we live in a world that's filled with heroes and villains. He brushes it off with a whimsical shrug. Not at all. Naomasa waves his hand to reassure the boy. I've just had a lot on my mind as of late. The detective finds himself running that same hand through his hair again as he awkwardly chuckles. Ah, I see. Hence the coffee. Akatani stands on his toes with some newfound spunk in his demeanor, assuming you're still craving that toffee nut, of course. Naomasa gives the barista a small nod. That would be perfect, before clearing his throat and holding out his hand. How rude of me, I forgot to introduce myself. Akatani takes and shakes it. I'm Naomasa Tsukachi. Nice to meet you, officially this time. Akatani gives the detective a bright smile before turning around to search for a table where he can be seated. The waiter falters for a moment, as if there's something missing in the far corner of the cafe. He recovers quickly though, maintaining a smile on his face and gesturing to a free space. Right this way, Tsukachi-san, he says whilst leading the detective to the table. Naomasa arches an eyebrow, noticing the single spoon that sits there. It might just be from some kind of jam or something, but he swears there's a red stain on it. Akatani snatches it away rather hastily too, not even making a comment about its existence. The detective lets out a heavy sigh, letting go of what must just be paranoia. Of all the things that I could have picked up from Aizawa, he mutters under his breath with a shake of his head. And that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like and subscribe and I'll see you in the next part.